So good evening, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. And thank you for joining us for this webinar on moving to Portugal, where we're going to be focusing a lot on moving to Portugal from the US. There has been a lot of interest for certain reasons over the past week or so, with people wanting to move to the US, wanting to move to Portugal from the US and start a new life here. And obviously people have questions, especially those who are just thinking about this for the first time. So thankfully, we've got a really good lineup today because we have got Inês Silva, who's been here before, who's going to be talking about the legal side of things, and Scott Kirk, who has also been here before and spoken about property and golden visas and everything else. Between the two of them, I think we can cover a lot of ground about what it takes to move to Portugal, the different visas like the D7, the digital nomad visa, the golden visa, etc. And we're also going to get into some property questions and some tax questions. So basically, your entire journey moving to Portugal, from what kind of visa do I qualify for, to will I have to pay taxes in Portugal, to can I buy a property there, and how much is that going to cost me? Can I get a mortgage, etc. So Scott and Inês, one by one, maybe you could just introduce yourselves. Inês, I'll let you go first and just speak a little bit about your background.
So I'm a lawyer. I worked with immigration for the past 10 to 12 years. So this is a matter that I'm really familiar with and that I really enjoy working with. I've been working with Scott and Visas.pt since I think about a year now, and it's working perfectly. It's a perfect match. So that's it.
That's it. And Inês was on before talking about the challenges of getting an IMA appointment, and I think people found that really, really helpful and really practical as well. Scott, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I moved to Portugal about 7 years ago, and I've been working in property and real estate since then. We created buyproperty.com, and through that process, in order to assist our clients moving to Portugal, we set up another website called visas.pt, where we helped people relocate to Portugal, including with help from the great Inês Silva we're talking to.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we're going to dive into some of the questions about visas. Now, the vast majority of questions that have come through have been about the D7, which some people call the passive income visa. It's typically aimed at, or it's typically used by retirees, I should say, but not exclusively for them. Inês, maybe for those who don't know, you could just sort of give a rundown of this visa and what it involves and who might qualify for it.
So it's easy if you understand the logic of this visa, you'll immediately know if you qualify for it. So the logic of this visa is that you hold an income, and the income is not going to be affected by any way when you move to Portugal. So you have to have at least the minimum wage of Portugal in income per month, and then this income must not be impacted when you move to Portugal. So retirees always qualify for this visa when you have investments and you have dividends, interest, you have a property, it's loaned, and you have a monthly income. So it's not going to be impacted when you move to Portugal. So these incomes qualify for this. Previously, when we had a remote worker, we used this visa, but now we have a specific visa for this. So it's not easy to qualify being a remote worker.
Okay, so it's an income that's not going to be affected. I understand it's sort of things like pensions or social security.
Yes.
Also rental income would fall under that.
Yes, property income, dividends, interest. When you have your money is applied somewhere and you receive a monthly payment, as long as you meet the threshold. Also, it doesn't mean that you have to have the 820 euros coming from just one source of income. You can have combined sources of income. As long as you meet that threshold, you're fine, and you can move to Portugal with this visa.
Okay, fantastic. And social security and pensions seem to be the main two that I see coming up for it. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. because it's also so easy to prove when you have this kind of income. It's so easy to prove. You just have to have your monthly slips from your pension and you just deliver that and it's fine, you're approved. And so we
Okay.
like to add also bank statements to show that the money, of course, enters your account each month, but it's very easy. And for retirees, this is the perfect visa.
It sounds like it. So if I'm receiving some form of passive income, I would use my bank statements to say this is the amount coming from Social Security.
Yes, of course, you also have to have some kind of supporting documents, but bank statements are always a plus.
Bank statements are a plus. And then the other supporting documents, I guess, would be things from, say, the pension provider saying this is how much is coming in, something along those lines.
Yes, yes. All documents that show how much you're going to earn per month with this pension. So
Okay.
Social Security declarations, tax declarations, everything that can show that you have this fixed income per month.
And some people are asking about the monthly income requirement. So for an individual and then for a
the
family.
requirement, it's correspondent to the minimum wage of Portugal, which is now 820, but it's going to increase in January. This is why I was not using the amount, but just saying minimum wage, because it's going to increase.
It's going to increase in January. Okay, so that means that the amount people will need will be more. I assume then once you start adding a sort of like a spouse or children into it, it becomes more that you would need to have.
Yes, you have to have, for your spouse, you have to have 50% of the minimum wage per month. So you have to
Okay.
have 100% for yourself, 50% for your spouse, and then it's 30% for each dependent.
30% for each dependent. Do we know roughly how much it's going to increase by?
No, it's not going to be a lot. I think it's going to be around 50 euros. So
Around 50 euros.
It's still going to be lower than 900 euros per month, which is a round number, and it's easier for you to make the math.
Yeah, that makes it easy to understand. Okay, so 820 as it stands, good incentive to get your application in before it goes up. I guess that's going to have a bigger effect on things like the digital nomad visa, where I think that's 4 times the Portuguese monthly minimum wage.
Yes, it's going to increase a lot in the digital nomad visa because it's proportional, of course.
Okay, we will get to the digital nomad visa in a second. One other thing that sometimes comes up is people have a income that they're getting, which is more like a friend or a family member is giving them sort of like an allowance per month, and they might have been getting this for several years. Would that count towards the D7, or do you think someone reviewing it would think that's a bit risky, it's not guaranteed like a pension or Social Security?
I don't think I would approve a visa with this kind of income as a D7 visa, because this also, you have no commitment from the source of the income. So you're not going to have the ability to predict if this is going to be a steady income. So I don't think this person will have their visa approved.
Okay, that is good to know.
That's just an exception. Imagine you have a court decision that grants you a certain amount of money per month. So if you have supporting documents that show that you're going to receive this money per month for several years, then you can get this visa approved. If it's just like an allowance, just because they want to give you an allowance, no, it's not going to be approved.
Okay, so if there is some legal requirement there that you would get it, then you would have a better chance of getting approved. Okay, and then another question that comes up, just because we've talked about dividends, normally that applies to investments. Some people would use dividends as a way of getting paid from a company. Is this the same thing? Because they're actively working for that wage, they're just choosing to get paid in a specific way.
Yes, if you are a shareholder and you receive dividends, then you can apply for this visa. As long as you meet the monthly threshold, then you can apply.
Okay. let's talk about some of the, so there is one question there that I'll just answer, which is there a health checkup required for the D7 or other visas?
No, no, no.
Okay. So that is good to know. What about the sort of physical stay requirements? So you need to spend a little bit of time each year in Portugal. How much is that for the D7 and other visas?
So I know where you're going with this. So the law says that you have to stay 6 consecutive months or 8 intercrossed. And you're going to
Mhm.
ask, is this over a period of 1 year or a period of 2 years? And
Yeah.
here we go. We found a loophole in the law. Because what happened before is that the first card you received it had an expiration of 1 year. But then when COVID came, they enlarged this to 2 years, but they didn't change the law. So what the law says is that you have to stay this period within the first residency card. So this is why people are saying that it's not within the 1 year period, it is within the 2 year period. But my personal experience is that I have no problem with renewals when people fulfill this within a 1 year. So I think they are applying this. It's a loophole. It wasn't fixed yet, so they are not really concerned about it being a 2 year length of the card. They are applying this yearly.
Okay, so people should assume that the government is expecting them to stay either 6 months with no time spent outside Portugal or 8 months with some gaps, and that
Yes,
should be
because
per year.
this is linked to you being a fiscal residency in Portugal. So the fiscal residency is counted within a full year. So this is linked, and the logic is that you apply this to the residency card. So the 2 year question, I understand the sense of it because the law says the length of the expiration date of the card, but as this changed and the law wasn't updated, we are still talking about the year.
Okay, I understand that. I understand where people are coming from as well. There's a mixture of things happening there. Some people are looking for this loophole to spend as little time in Portugal while still maintaining residency.
Well,
But
if you want to spend little time in Portugal while maintaining residency, it's better if you apply for a golden visa.
okay, so that is the most flexible option then.
Yes.
The other people I can imagine are, if you're used to living in the country that you've grown up with, you've probably never had to think about physical stay requirements or probably not thought about them. So this is the first time you're thinking about them. It may feel a little bit sort of like you're tied to a place and you've never had that experience before.
Yes, it's a bit overwhelming when you're planning to move and you want to know when you can visit your family. So this is something that you're going to get used to. You're going to get used to your timer. You're going to also, if you travel within the Schengen area, this will not count as time being away. So you have to use that in your favor.
Oh, I see. So if I go to sort of France for a couple of weeks or Germany for a couple of weeks, that's not going to matter?
No, there's no border control.
Ah, okay. Well, that is good to know. I think a lot of people would be happy with that as a compromise. They get to spend more time discovering other European countries and only a couple of months maybe outside the country to see family and friends.
Yes.
I have a question then about cryptocurrency. So we're talking things like Bitcoin and the D7 Visa. In what instances would you say that could be used? I'm guessing that would have to sort of generate some kind of income for it to be
Yes.
worthwhile.
It has to generate some kind of income in euros.
Okay,
So this is the problem, but as long as it generates an income monthly and you can prove that it's steady and regular, you can show by your bank account that it has entered for a length of time, then I think it would qualify. Yes, we are evolving.
Okay, that is good to know. I guess there's an element there of cryptocurrencies always going up and down, so that's something that you would need to consider, making sure you're constantly going to meet that minimum income requirement. And then one of the requirements for the D7, we'll talk about a few of them, but I would say one of the most difficult for people is that they typically need to have an address in Portugal before they move there. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, you need to have, well, one of the ways you get the lodging requirement fulfilled is that you present a rental agreement, and it has to be for a length of at least 12 months. So this is something quite scary because you're going to rent a property without being here. And as you know, it's not that easy to get appointments right now. And we are talking about the US. So sometimes we do have to wait a little bit until we get that appointment for you to go and deliver your visa request. And by the time we start trying to get the appointment, you need to have, of course, the house rented, because we can get the appointment fast and then you have to go. So this might cause you to have a rental home here for a few months before you can travel. But this kind of visa is for people that have an income that's steady. And if you're not financial stable and you don't have the stability to rent a property for a few months before coming, I advise you to prepare and only come here once you have that kind of savings and that kind of power. Because if not, you're going to be if some surprise arises with the immigration process, you're going to be in a bad state. So it's better if you don't have this capacity at the moment, you can always prepare and then apply a little later. Because this is a requirement, of course. It's a requirement that's going to drain a bit of your finances before you're even able to set foot on Portugal. But this is something that also proves the Portuguese authorities that you have stability and financial capacity to move.
Okay. A similar thing comes up where I see people saying, you know, I've got a social security or a pension, my money is coming in each month, but I don't have savings, and savings we'll talk about are another requirement. Is this a hard requirement to have sort of 820 times 12 or whatever the amount is?
No, it's not. They are not very strict about this. You just have to show that you do have a little bit of savings, because if you're going to have 300 euros on your account, you're not going to be approved, of course. But if you tell me, I don't have because the law says a full year of the minimum wage for the primary visa holder. So if you tell me, I don't have a full year, but I have 10 months, I'm going to tell you, you're going to be approved, because they will see that you have some capacity to save some money. But if you don't have at least the minimum savings, I would advise you to wait and then apply.
Okay, I think that does make sense as well. A lot of people underestimate just how unexpected some of the costs can be that pop up when you go to move to another country. And so even if this wasn't an actual requirement, I would definitely suggest you have savings anyway.
Yes.
So people typically, I would say most people rent a place to qualify for the D7. Some people buy a place in advance. Another option is to stay with someone living in Portugal, a friend or family member. Can you speak a little bit about what's involved there, and if you have a friend or family member that's willing to have you come stay, how do they qualify to be your sort of host?
Well, you have that. I'm sure all of the people here have read on the internet about this. So you have what is called a responsibility term, that the person who holds a residency card here, it has to be either Portuguese or a person that holds a residency card or a residency permit here. European that also live here is fine. They have to sign a declaration saying that they will be liable and responsible for you while you're here in Portugal. And this declaration needs to be notarized. The signature needs to be notarized. So, but this is not as simple as signing a document, okay? This person is going to be liable if you commit a crime, if you have to be sent back to your country for any expenses that the Portuguese state incurs, this person is going to be liable for. Even if you need medical treatment, this person is going to be liable for the costs. So this is not something you should sign without considering this. This is something that seems very simple because it's just a piece of paper.
Mhm.
You just fill in your information and it seems like it's not a big deal, but it actually is. And you should think about it very thoughtfully before you sign it. But I've never heard of someone having such an issue with this. So if it is a family member or someone that you're really going to provide house and you're going to have settle in, then I see no problem in you signing this. Also, one of the requirements for these visas, all of these visas, is the travel and health insurance. So if you're going to have that, the person is going to be secure on that side. Assuming you're not a criminal, the person is going to be secured on that too. So it's going to be fine.
Okay, so yes to your reliable friends and family members, but think hard about those questionable ones. Okay, well, that is good to know as an option. And is there, like, because I think what a lot of people are thinking with this is they know someone in Portugal, they'll stay with them for a few months, and then they'll find a place of their own, either to rent or buy. Is it sort of understood that people might do this for a few months and then move on to their own place?
Yes, but listen. The officers tend to look at this solution as being a last resource. So they don't see this as being such a positive solution because they want you to have the capacity to rent a place. They want you to have the capacity to buy a place. They don't want to risk you coming here and being a burden for the Portuguese state. So your chances of being approved with this solution for the lodging are going to decrease significantly. So it is possible, but it's not going to be as good for you as if you rent or buy a property here.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, the like you say, they're looking for people that they can bring in their own income, that they're completely responsible themselves. That's the whole point of the visa. So I
Yes.
guess, yeah, you want to make yourself look as responsible as possible and reliable as possible. Let's see if we have any more questions on the D7. We've spoken a little bit about health and travel insurance there. I understand that health insurance in particular is a requirement for the IMA interview, which comes when someone moves to Portugal. Do people need to keep this insurance going after that, or could they immediately cut it off? And do you have any advice on whether people should keep health insurance in Portugal?
Well, if you have the possibility to keep it, I would always keep. Myself, I'm Portuguese, I have access to public system, and I do have a private insurance. I think the public healthcare here is very good, but it also gives you a little bit of a waiting time. So if you have access to the private system for the small things like a consultation, it's best if you keep your insurance. But your question was if you need to keep it after the IMA appointment. No, you don't have to keep it after the IMA appointment, or you have to keep it until you have your residency card, because after you have your residency card, you have access to the public health system here. So you don't really need to keep the private insurance. I would advise you to keep it as a safeguard if you need to do some exams, because sometimes what takes a little bit of time here is for you to have access to a CT scan, something simple like that, but the public health system takes a while for you to do it. So if you have the possibility to do it in the private system, then you just deliver the results in the public system and it's a lot faster. So if you can keep the insurance, but you're not required to do it after you have the residency card, you can access the public health system with no costs.
Okay, that is good to know.
The same cost as being a Portuguese.
It does sound like, especially for that first period, it would be a good idea to keep paying it. Yeah. Let's see. So then this is a difficult question to answer, but let's say someone gathers all the documents, they submit the documents to their, the consulate or wherever they're applying through. From that point onwards, how long would you say it would take before they could potentially move to Portugal?
So the waiting time is going to be around 60, and some countries are taking up to 90 days. to analyze your case. But after your visa is approved, you can immediately move to Portugal. You have 120 days to enter legally, and normally you have 2 legal entries, so you can immediately move if you can. You should always count on that 60 to 90 days, so you have some wiggle space, because they are going to take at least 60 days they are going to take, so you should count on that.
And then for those people that have maybe something like a social security or a pension that's due to come, should they apply now and say, hey, I'm getting this, next year, or should they wait until it's actually coming into their bank account?
Yeah, they have to wait because they have to show proof. I always like to add the bank statements from the last 3 months to show that the money has entered the last 3 months. So you should wait until you have this money, because if not, you're not going to be approved, because the income must be, they say that it must be current, so you need to have it.
Okay. Good to know. So this is the D7, which we've focused on. I think it's probably going to be the most popular one, so we may get more questions about that. Then we move on to the digital nomad visa, as it's called. Can you sort of explain a little bit about that and how that differs to the D7?
Yeah, this visa was created especially for remote workers. So before as I said, we used the D7 for remote workers, and we qualified that as passive income. But it's not passive income because you're working to get it. So it's not passive, It's active income. So they created this independent visa for remote workers. The problem with this visa is that the threshold is a lot higher. So for the other visas, you have a threshold of 1 times the minimum wage. For this, it's 4 times minimum wage. So not everyone can qualify for this visa. But if you have the income and you qualify, this visa is actually quite simple. You just have to prove that you have a contract that allows you to work remotely, that you earn this amount of money per month, so 4 times the minimum wage, and that you're going to keep earning it when you move to Portugal. They ask for a declaration, the contract, and also a declaration from your company saying that you're allowed to work remotely and that they are going to still employ you when you move to Portugal. And that's basically it. Then you, of course, have the general requirements, travel insurance, passport, all the other requirements, but the specific requirements for this visa are just that: the contract that allows you to work remotely, proof that you're still going to earn this money when you start here in Portugal, and the last 3 salary slips. So this is actually, if you can qualify for this visa, this is actually a very good visa because it's simple. You prove it by documents. You don't have to explain a lot. It's straightforward.
Okay, so it sounds like people should look into that if the D7 isn't an option. One person there is saying that they might have an option of either the D7 or the digital nomad visa. If they, let's say, were potentially qualified for both, all things being equal, would you have a preference on which one they should apply for?
Yes, I would apply for the D7 because the D7, when it's time for the renewal, if you get like a pension, if you have interest, it's probably easier to prove that you maintain this income. As of having a job, it can fluctuate. Your income might fluctuate if you lose this job. I have a situation like this. It's time for the renewal and they are not working in the same place, so they don't meet the threshold. So it's D7 is bad. Also, the threshold is so it's small, so it's easier for you to maintain that income per month.
Yeah, exactly. That's good advice, Ines. And then with the adding, let's say adding a spouse onto that visa, would you need 50% of your monthly requirement as well there?
No, you still maintain the 50% of the minimum wage. So that's what makes it so appealing also, because we know salaries and income in the US is a lot higher than Portugal. So a lot of the remote workers are going to qualify for this visa. So it's very good for, I have a lot of US clients that already have their visa, so it's fine. It's a very good visa. If you're afraid because this is is a most recent visa, don't be. It's working very fine. It's working perfectly, actually.
Okay, that's good to know. So I think 4 times 820 is about 3280. If you had a
Yes,
spouse, then you would add half the Portuguese minimum wage, so you would add 410.
410.
Okay, yeah. That's very reasonable. If it was 50%, it would be a lot more challenging, and then if you added children as well, it gets a
Yes.
lot more. That is good to know, because am I right in saying that you take one person's income for an application, or could you combine both?
You can combine both. Actually, when I have the chance, I don't like to have just one primary holder and then all accompanying members. I like to, if I have a chance, I like to apply for primary holders for all family members. Of course, the children are going to be dependents, but it's easier when it's time to renew, because if something changes, if you have an independent visa, it's easier. Also, because of the IMA appointments. When suing IMA, if you're the primary holder of the visa, if you have your own D7, you can sue IMA directly. But if you're a family member, you have to wait for your primary holder to have their residency card and then sue IMA. So all my clients are, if I have a couple of retirees and they both meet the threshold, I'm going to apply for 2 D7 visas, of course, because it makes no sense. The fees are the same, and you're going to have this income for life, so you're going to be fine with renewing. Also, you're independent.
Okay, I see. So if you had a couple, they both had Social Security, you would put through 2 D7 applications rather than
Yes.
putting them on the same. I guess that when you were saying about independence, one thing I've thought before is like, what happens if one person in the couple gets well, if they both get divorced, and one person was the additional person, they wouldn't have their own visa, right? Because they would have been relying on the person.
Yes,
So
if you have a residency card by then, it's fine. When it's time to renew it, you just show your own financial means and you're going to be fine. You show your divorce and you show your documents and the financial means. But it's easier if you don't need that. You just show your financial means and your card is renewed. So also when you, for instance, you have that article when you're married with a Portuguese. So when you get divorced from Portuguese, you can still renew your card. You can still renew it, but you do have to show some additional documents. Wouldn't it be better if you had your own residency card by your own self and you weren't dependent or on a marriage or something like that? I'm not a feminist, I'm not speaking, but it's easier. I have a couple that for instance, the lady is the primary holder, but as the appointments are taking so long, he received this pension now. So we are going to apply for 2 D7s. So it's easier for you when you get the cards. You don't have to wait. You're not dependent. You get your own appointment. It's easier.
Okay, you know what, that seems sensible. I can imagine a lot of people would like to have that, that independence and not be the sort of the second person in the application. We've talked about the accommodation requirement for the D7 needing somewhere to rent or buy or someone to stay with. Is this the same for the digital nomad visa?
So the digital nomad visa, we can do it easily. We can just show an Airbnb. For instance, I've done that with a client. Of course, you can't rent for 15 days and expect it to be approved, but the requirements are not as strict. So you can show that you rented for 3 months and you're going to be fine.
Okay, that is
Because
good to
you're a
know.
nomad, right? You're
Yes.
going to move around Portugal. That's what they expect. So you're not expected to have a full commitment to a place.
Okay, well, I think that'll come as good news to the nomads who want to explore all of Portugal, because there is a lot to explore, a lot of places to consider. Scott, we haven't had any thing from you. If there's anything that you want to chime in on at any time, let me know. We are going to get to the golden visa in a second, which I think is something that you are knowledgeable on.
Yes, exactly. There's a few things I wanted to add. I see some questions popping up about bank accounts, and there are some requirements for visas that require, for example, a NIF number and also a local bank account as part of the process. And this is a requirement. Just wanted to mention that to answer that question.
Perfect. Before one question that I've seen pop up a couple of times, so I'm just going to ask Inej before we go into the golden visa, is the recognition of marriages that are legal in the US. I think the question specifically relates to married gay couples. Is this recognized in Portugal?
Yes, yes, of course. Yes.
Okay, so I think that is good news. I believe Portugal was one of the first countries to recognize this, actually.
Yes, we are very advanced there. So I'm seeing a question here that I would like to answer. We own a condo in Portugal that we rent out. Do we still need to show a rental agreement? Of course, if you have a registered agreement on finances, you're not going to be able to live on that property. So of course you have to show that you still have a rental for yourself, or you own a property where you're going to move. On the plus side, you can use this as passive income, the rents.
Okay, so even if the property is located in Portugal, you could still use that as passive income for the
Yes,
T7.
yes, of course.
Okay, good to know. Let's see. I'm gonna see if there's any more digital nomad questions here. I don't think there is. Let's move on to the golden visa, at least for now. Scott, I'll let you talk for a little bit. You have done a lot of research on the golden visa. Can you sort of give a little breakdown of what's involved in it now? Is it still possible to buy property and qualify, or what are the main routes that people are using to qualify for it now?
Sure. So previously, people could buy a property, for example, a villa above 500,000 euros and qualify for the golden visa. And unfortunately, that stopped a while ago, and so that's no longer possible. However, in the same tone, there is other options that allow people to get the golden visa still. And I think a lot of people may not be aware of this because they all assume that since the golden visa for property is no longer available, that means the whole program is shut down, but it's not the case. And one of the best ways that people are finding to do this is to invest in a fund. And there's all sorts of different qualifying funds that you can go for, revolving anywhere from investing in a schools or really anything. There's a fund for it, but there's some that are more, I guess, reliable or most trustworthy than others. And so I went through every single one of them and tried to find, the trust value, to find out which ones I could recommend, which ones I couldn't, and such. And the ones I found were really the ones dealing with hospitality, because what they would do is they'd buy hotels, and then after that point in time, they would give back a dividend on the investments to the individuals. And that seemed a little bit more trustworthy because they had the assets behind them. Because one of the biggest benefits of buying a property in Portugal and getting the golden visa that way is because you had this asset backing it. And a lot of the funds don't have that, but the hospitality industry ones do. So it allows me to, really believe that if the whole fund went up, up in smoke, then they still have these assets to it in order to pay back everyone's debt after the fact. And what they do is they buy these hotels, they fix them up, and then make them more profitable and give the dividends back to everyone else. Now, I know you're going to ask me about the donations to cultural arts as well. So I wanted to get into a little bit about that. And typically, you can do this. I mean, it's 250,000 euro investment into any kind of cultural arts program. But if you go interior, you can take that down to about 200,000 euros. The downside about these is it's typically a donation, so you don't get your money back. Whereas if you invest in the funds, they can usually give about a 5% return every year for your investment. And then at the end of the term, you get your investment back, where the cultural visas of 200 to 250,000 are really just a donation. There are some exceptions. For example, if you invest in a film or something along those lines that deals with cultural aspects, then there's a chance of getting the money back if the film does well. But of course, that's a big if. So for me and my recommendations, I'd always recommend the funds.
Okay, that seems to be the most practical. I understand there's a mixture. Some offer like a fixed return each year, and some just say we're investing in Portuguese startups. They could go really high up or not. So there's a mixture, right?
Yeah, and the one where you invest in the startups, and in fact, there's quite a few, they've had some pretty good returns so far. So I'm not alienating them completely. But since the financial crisis and a lot of the aspects of the global downturn are coming to play, that makes it a little bit more risky for me. And again, they have no assets to back it up afterwards. So I love the idea, as I have a startup myself. It's just, for me, not as safe of an investment.
Okay. Let's see what other questions. So we're talking about 500,000 for the golden visa there. Let's say you're applying as a couple. Do you need 2 times 500,000, or is it just once?
It's just the one. You can actually apply for yourself and then bring your family in under that same application, not just the wife, but the children also.
Okay, good to know. And I understand there are other elements to the golden visa, sort of a job creation area, for example, or investing in a Portuguese company.
Exactly, and those amounts vary as well. And to be honest, if a lot of people will be coming over here for really to retire, and do they want the extra stress of investing in a business? I mean, they can invest in their own business and potentially do that as well. But it has to create a certain amount of jobs, and that requirement is quite risky. So if you can find a good, solid business that you want to invest in, that's a pathway as well. I just don't know any of that. I would trust myself.
Yeah,
I'm sure,
for sure.
I'm sure there's some.
I think with the golden visa, people are often looking for what's the way that I'm going to invest my money, but I'm also going to get it back with the least amount of work involved. So
Exactly.
speaking about getting it back, how long does it take before you can sort of cash out your investment, but still meet all the legal requirements?
Well, there are some options to cash out with some of the funds before the 6-year period that's required, but they don't all provide that. So if you change your mind, usually they don't give you an option to cash out. Some do if you need be. But after the 6-year period, I believe it's usually the term that is allowed to not only get your permanent residency here and your citizenship, but also get your money back at that point in time as well. So you should really see it as a long-term, at least 6-year investment.
Okay, so that money is going to be tied up then for that period at least. Let's see what else we have on the golden visa. I know there's a few questions there. The benefit then of the golden visa, Scott, what would you say that is?
Well, I mean, first of all, you get a return on your investment and it's locked in a certain amount. So it's a safe and stable investment. I think that's probably the most important. But when it comes to the visa opportunities, there's a really unique aspect of it where you're only required to be here for 7 days a year, maximum, 2 weeks every 2 years. So it's really a great opportunity for those who don't wish to relocate over to Portugal to still put their foot in the door and get the citizenship over the 5-6 year period.
Okay, that's interesting. I know, with the interest that is in Portugal at the moment coming from the US, some people were already thinking about, I'm going to move to Portugal. Other people now they want a backup plan. They want something to sort of have a foot in the door in Europe, just in case they do decide to move to Portugal. So this sounds like it could be an option, particularly if you're, say, still working in the US.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what it really allows you to do is take a 1 or 2 week vacation every couple of years and still move your pathway towards citizenship that way. But if you want to stay in the US or wherever you may be, you can still do that. And you don't have to become a permanent resident over here until you decide to, and start paying taxes over here until you decide to. So there's a lot of really great benefits just to get the process started.
Okay, I can see the tax one will definitely be popular with people because taxes always come up as a thing that people don't want to pay when they move to Portugal. Let's talk about finding a fund that you think is worthwhile. You did a lot of research on it. You probably saw quite a variety of funds. I know I have. How do you pick which ones that you think are good? Is there a government list somewhere where you can go?
I mean, I'm sure there is. I went and asked the fund managers. So that every fund that gets approved needs to have a approved by other funds or other fund managers that sort of make sure that they do everything legally, they don't break any laws. And so I went to them and I asked them what their options were, and then I went and interviewed every single one of them. And one of the things that struck me that as being one of the most important things is the management team itself. I mean, some of these funds are 1 or 2 guys, and they invest in startups or whatever, where other ones have a proper team that are experienced and they have a background to suit, and they have a lot of capital already invested in their fund. So it's not just about what the Golden Visa Fund is, but it's also about the people behind it and the capital that they have and the track record, really.
Okay. That's good to know. And then there is a question then on how you might avoid paying taxes in Portugal on the Golden Visa. I assume that's because you're potentially only there for 7 days a year. It's not long enough to be considered a tax resident.
Exactly.
Okay. So there's flexibility there for those that want it. Let's see what other questions we have. I know there's a lot more coming in about the D7 again. We might switch back to that just for a little bit. I have a question for Inej Scott, so I will switch over to her just for now. Inej, we have some questions about switching visa. So some people are thinking maybe I'll start off with a Golden Visa. Don't know what I'm doing yet, but then I might switch to the D7, or I might start off with the D7 I see here and then switch to the Digital Nomad Visa. How is it possible just to switch them, or would you be basically starting the process from scratch?
So listen, there's a big confusion. I always see this with my clients. This is the first thing we established from the beginning. You need to understand from the get-go what a visa is. A visa is just a permission for you to enter a country legally. So this doesn't give you permission to live in a country. It gives you permission to enter the country. So as soon as you get your visa, you move to Portugal, or as soon as when you want, within that period, you come and you move to Portugal. When you're here, you're going to get your residency card. For you to get your residency card, you go to an appointment at IMA, you deliver all documents. It's basically a repetition from the documents you delivered for your visa, and then you get a residency card. The residency card is going to be attached for the of course, to the type of visa you previously asked. So you can switch visa, but this is not something that's really common, or that's something that I would advise, because after you deliver your process, it takes 60 to 90 days to have your visa approved. So why would you change it within that time period? The Golden Visa is slightly different. We still have cases pending from 2022, so it's still a bit different. But the Golden Visa, as soon as you submit your application and pay your fees, you can move to Portugal. So it's a bit different. So speaking of the other visas, it makes no sense for you to change visa. But if you're speaking about you're coming here and you came here with the Digital Nomad Visa, you got your card attached to the Digital Nomad Visa. After a few years of being here, it's time for you to renew the card, but you no longer meet the threshold, or on this period you retired. Can you change articles? Yes, you can change articles when it's time for the renewal, for instance. If this is the question, yes, you can change later on, but changing visa, I've never heard of. Once you start your application, go through with it. Don't change it.
Okay, I can see what you were saying there. Someone might be, say 3 years away from retirement. They can work remotely for those 3 years, and then they're thinking, I will switch to the D7 there. I can see an instance where that might be the case.
Yes.
Scott, just jumping back to you, if people want to get more information about the Golden Visa, is that something that you're able to help with? At least just share the research that you have done.
Absolutely. I mean, anyone who wants to find more information about the funds that I recommend, and maybe the ones I don't, is welcome to write me at contact@visas.pt. Maybe you can include that in the mail out afterwards as well.
I will include that. I'll also be sending a link out to the recording straight after this, so anybody who wants that, just keep an eye on your inbox. Let's jump back to some non-Golden Visa questions again. Actually, Inej, I think we're going to switch on to some more general questions here. What I think people are looking for, just looking at the first two questions, is they're looking for a way to move to Portugal. They don't qualify for the D7 or the Digital Nomad Visa or the Golden Visa. And so the first question that I can see there is there a volunteering visa?
Yes, there is a volunteering visa, and then you get your residency permit here, your residency card through Article 94. So yes.
So there is. And would that be a case of sort of just contacting charitable organizations in Portugal and trying to convince them to have you as a volunteer?
Yes, but it has to be from charity list that belongs to the approved charity institution. Sorry, so you have to really be careful when applying so that you make sure that you're going to meet the criteria. So contact us and we'll help you for you to be safely
Okay.
coming here with this visa, because this is not a very common visa, so it's not very known. So you have to be careful to meet the requirements.
Okay, that is good to know. And then in terms of I don't know if this is a visa that you've covered in the past before, but are there any requirements to meet if you find a volunteering position? Does it have to, say, for example, offer you accommodation? Do you need to have savings? Is there anything like that that people would need to know
Yes, you
about?
need to prove that if you're going to be volunteering here, you're not supposed to be earning money. So you need to prove that you have your own savings, of course. So you have to show you know, the threshold is always a year worth of savings. So you need to show that. And also you need to show that you have accommodation. If the volunteering institution is going to provide it, then you have to have documents that show that you're going to have accommodation. But yes, you can use that accommodation that's going to be provided by the institution, but you have to show proof of that. It has to be a
Okay,
commitment from the institution.
perfect. I can see Carol and Leonardo are asking, or Leandro are asking, if I'm going to share contact information for Inej and Scott. Absolutely, that'll be coming out in the email that comes out after this. So similar, I think similar sort of type of question then is someone wants to extend their 90-day Schengen visa. So I guess this is to spend more time in Portugal to see if it's right for them. How easy is this to do without, say, having some kind of emergency reason you need to extend it?
It's not very easy for you to extend your stay here when you came with a tourist visa. You have to really show proof that you need to stay here, or you have to justify. For instance, imagine you planned the trip and then you decided to stay here and study museums, you decide.
Okay.
Then you have to justify you staying here. It's possible. It's very common for you to get it approved, but you do have to justify it. It's not immediate or automatic. Also, for this, you need an appointment
Yeah.
at
Okay.
IMA, which is not easy, as you know. So it's not very easy at the moment to get this. But if you get your appointment, then as long as you justify it, it's going to be extended.
Okay, so two big challenges for people considering there. So we have a question coming up there. It's a political one, and we're not going to get into the politics here, but if someone's living, this is specifically about the US, but if someone's living in a country and there ends up being some sort of hatred against gay people, or people feel unsafe, at what point can they apply for political asylum in Portugal?
So the political asylum does if you're a gay person and you feel persecuted, you can qualify for this, but you do have to show proof that you're being persecuted and that your life is in danger, which, not going into the political state of the country, as of this moment, I think it would be hard for you to be approved, because you can't really show that your life is in danger or that you're being persecuted at the moment.
Yeah,
So
you can't sort of apply thinking, I think it's going to get bad. This is what I think, because it hasn't happened yet.
yes, so I think
Okay.
it would be hard. But if you can justify with some proof, yes, it might be proof, because the law does cover this. My Portuguese did escape there, but yes, the law does cover this.
Okay, so good to know that the law does cover this. I imagine if you're in that situation, it's challenging, or for anyone applying for any kind of a political asylum, because you've got to wait for the bad thing to happen before you can apply. But I guess the best thing that you can do is, if you do see things changing in a negative way, start getting your everything in order, all the paperwork that you might need, and then as soon as that becomes a possibility, you'll be ready to go, because gathering those documents takes a long time.
Yes.
Let's have a look at another question. So I understand that for visas like the D7 or the digital nomad visa, you can apply as an unmarried couple or a married couple. Obviously, it's easier if you're married, you just show your marriage certificate, and that's fairly straightforward. If you aren't married, but you're in a long-term relationship, what do you show to sort of prove that you have that?
So it depends on your jurisdiction. In Portugal, we have something which is like a document that can show that you're living and you're not married, but you're still living together. So if you do have some kind of document that proves that you have this liaison, that you're living together for more than 3 years, you're considered to be in a stable union and you can apply for this. But you do have to show some kind of documents, okay?
Okay, so there needs to be some evidence. One area where this gets a little bit complicated is people who are in long distance relationships, where I've seen it before. One person, say, lives in the US, another person lives in, let's say, the Philippines. They're in two different countries. They're in a long-term relationship. They see each other every now and then, but they're not living together. How challenging is it going to be for someone in that type of relationship to apply?
It's going to be very challenging. You're going to fall in the hands of the person that's going to analyze your procedure, because this is not something that you're going to be able to prove with documents. You're not living together. So the best option for this couple would be to be primary holders of their own visas.
Okay.
If it's not possible, sometimes I advise people to get married.
Okay.
Because there's no way for you to prove that you have common of anything when you're living in two different countries. It's very hard to justify it.
So the documents that people look at to prove it are more things like, say, you both live at the same address, you've got your mail going there, rather
Common
than
bank account, joint bank accounts, anything really that you can prove. Here, for instance, you can go to, like, you have the city hall, but here you have like juntas freguesia, which is like smaller places, and you can go and get like a proof that you live in the same address for like 3 to 4 years, and this serves as the proof. So it depends really on your country. You have to find a way to prove it, because sometimes there's country where you just go to the registration office and they issue the documents for you. So we have to see from in the US, it's not easy. We have to find other ways, like joint bank accounts, rental contracts, rental agreements that have the same addresses. I've used work contracts that had the same addresses. So we always find a way, we try to find a way.
Okay, so it's really document heavy then, because I know in some other countries, maybe this is more for citizenship, people are often having to prove their relationship through, these are photos of us on vacation together, things like that. That doesn't get used here so much?
No, not here. No,
Okay.
not so much. It's not very common, but as a last resort, I would try, of course, if you're living in two different countries, but we have amazing pictures of the time you're getting together. We can try to show plane tickets, photos, but this is not going to be 100% certain that you're going to be approved. So I always like to go with 100%. So,
Okay,
so
yeah.
I would try to find a way, but it's not easy.
It's not easy. Okay, that is good to know though, and I think people will find that information helpful. Another question that comes up is sometimes you'll have parents and they qualify for something like the D7 or the digital nomad visa. They have income that qualifies them to move to Portugal, and then they have children who are above the age of 18, let's say in their 30s. Can they add those children as dependents at sort of like age 25, 30, 35, something like that?
And that's a big stretch. But
Okay.
if they are studying and you can prove that you are really supporting them, then we can try to make a case, show enough documents to prove that they are dependent, but it's a big stretch. 30 is a big stretch because by 30, the law considers you to be an independent individual, so you're supposed to not be abrogated to your parents here. So,
Yeah.
but there's ways for us to prove that you're dependent. We can show that you have like an allowance. We can show that you're studying and that your parents pay for your tuition. So there's ways to do it. But again, it's not guaranteed that you're going to be approved.
Okay. I think it's the case that, you know, sometimes people are moving over, let's say they're retired, they can qualify for the D7, and it's very easy at that age because it's straightforward once you start getting Social Security. And then they have
Yes.
a child like that's 30 or 40 who maybe doesn't have a remote job or doesn't fit into any of the other visas, and they're thinking, how could I get them to come with me?
Yes, and also if they are taking care of you, imagine you need some people, you need care and your child is providing the care, then we can add them as dependents. They are not really
Okay.
dependent because they are caregivers, but we can. But again, it's a big stretch sometimes to do this, and we are relying on the good faith and goodwill of the person that's going to decide. And there's two decisions, because there's the decision by the time of the visa, and then there's the decision by the time of you getting the residency card. So I always prefer not to risk it and try to find another solution for this.
Okay.
Because
Good.
here in Portugal, as you know, if you're studying, you can apply for your own visa as long as you can show that you have the financial means. So probably if I had a case where a couple would come here and they have a 30-year-old, I would try to do that. I would
You-
try to make them come here as a tourist, enroll college or something that's recognized by Article 91 or 92, and then try to get their own residency card as a student, because showing, of course, the financial means of the fathers. But yes, I would try. Probably I wouldn't try to regroup them because I would find that very hard to be accepted.
Okay. And is there, if someone was doing that at, let's say, you know, 30 or older, there's no age restriction to when they can go back to studying and then be considered a dependent?
No, you can go for a master's, you can go for a post-graduation. There's no age
Okay.
requirement here. Of course, you're not to enroll kindergarten when you're 30. That would be weird and not approved. Also, there's not a visa for kindergarten. I'm just being funny.
Okay, well, that would have been easier than going to university, but yes, I guess people just have to get on with it and get back to the books. Let's talk a little bit about Article 15. So, as I understand it, this is when one person is an EU resident and they can move. They've got a non-EU family member that needs to come with them. What happens here? The person moves with them and then they apply through IMA to get residency?
Yes, but some countries you do have to have a visa. But once you're here, you just have to have an appointment and deliver the documents that show that you have a relationship with this person. If it's a father, if it's a marriage, then it depends. The documents will vary. But yes, it's pretty easy once you get the appointment. The hard part is always the appointment.
Okay, so the hard part is the appointment. This puts people in limbo a little bit. They feel like they, you know, can't do very much. Are they able to, say, apply for jobs in Portugal or work remotely at that point?
Well, if you have a visa, your visa is going to be valid until 30th of June of next year. So you can work with, it's not going to be a problem. But if you don't have a visa and you're here illegally, then you're going to have a hard time finding a job. If you find
Okay.
a job that's a company that's willing to employ you and you want to pay social security contributions and you want to work, it's fine. Because if not,
Okay.
the Portuguese state would have stopped by now, because we need immigrants to work here. So
Yes.
there's a lot of illegal immigrants here supporting Portugal. So yes,
Okay.
they are working, paying social contributions, and not having permits to live here. So yes, it's possible.
Perfect. And let's see, I guess people are sort of thinking like they've heard stories of people moving as the non-EU partner or the non-EU child and just sort of being stuck in limbo, and they want to be able to get on with their, their own life and start a life here, even though that means they might be waiting for an IMA appointment for a very long time. We've got some questions on taxes. Before we jump to that, Ines, if there's anything else that you want to add about any of the visas that people would find useful.
You said they would be stuck on the limbo. You have to you have to sue IMA at this point. For you to get Article 15 is what's happening now. You have to sue them to get the appointment. I've done it successfully, actually. Last week I received an appointment for Article 15.
Okay.
Because you're not going, you can't, when you move to a country, you can't wait, because it's going to be a burden for you if you keep waiting. You have to take action. This is why I say when you move here, you can't come without savings. You need to have some kind of financial security. When the time comes, you need to act. So you have to have that stability.
Yeah, it sounds like we did a webinar before about taking IMA to court, but there's a cost that just jumps up that you wouldn't have thought that you might have to pay when you move to another country, but immediately you need to do that. So you would sort of recommend that anybody moving as under the Article 15 should expect to have to go through this procedure.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Let's see then, we've got some questions on taxes. I know Scott has been doing research on that. Scott, I'll jump over to you for those questions then.
Okay. Yeah, we actually have a tax consultant, Gonzalo, but unfortunately he wasn't able to make it today due to being a little bit under the weather. But I'm happy to help. I'm not an accountant myself, but I know a thing or two about it, and I've got some notes from him I can help with as well. So bear with me. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to run through these and ask you. And before I do that, I'll just say some people have been saying, ask you about your contact details, saying, is it a good idea to work with an immigration lawyer? I think it's, when you start hearing about the complexities of moving to Portugal, it's definitely a good idea. And the details for Scott and Ines will be sent out after this. So let's do taxes then. First one, can I still apply for the NHR regime?
Yeah, so that's a good question that comes up a lot. And like you just said, it's very complex in itself, and there's many different answers depending on your situation. But essentially, NHR closed at the end of 2023. Now, it's still available in a few different ways. So if, for example, you change your residency to Portugal before the end of 2024, then you can still apply before the end of March 2025. But there's also an interesting thing in what's called the autonomous regions. And these are the islands off of Portugal where the NHR in its original state still exists. And if you, in other words, want to move to Madeira or Azores, you can still apply for it there. And not everyone wants to live there. I personally would love to. It's a beautiful place, but it certainly has that option for them there as well.
Okay. And then tax-free allowance. So a lot of countries have a point at which the taxes start coming in, and before that you're often paying 0% tax. Does Portugal have this in its tax regime?
It doesn't really have it per se, but there's a few exemptions. So, for example, if the income is coming from active work or pension, then there's a deduction of 4,104 euros. If the income is coming from an independent contractor activity, then the deduction varies depending on the activity. It could be 25%, 50%, or even 85%. So again, it's really a more complex question. If anyone wants to find out more, they're welcome to reach out.
Okay, you will put them in touch with your tax advisor in that case. Social Security, and we're, this question is talking to the US Social Security. If someone is receiving that and they're resident in Portugal as a tax resident, is that going to be taxed?
So the short answer to that is yes. Now, presuming you're a U.S. citizen, then the U.S. IRS has basically the first option to tax your Social Security. And then Portugal taxes Social Security, giving you basically a discount on what you've already paid in the U.S.
Okay, so you're claiming one against the other then.
Mhm.
And then some people pay no taxes on Social Security in the US currently while they're resident there. Would they then pay taxes in Portugal?
Yes, it's the same answer as before.
Okay. Taxes as a married couple, is there an advantage to being married or a disadvantage from a tax point of view?
So, I mean, it depends again if you have NHR or not. So if you have NHR, then it's a flat rate just for yourself. So it doesn't really matter that way. However, if you're married, then it again depends on the income level you're both at. But essentially, it gets divided between the couple to determine the tax bracket that you're in.
Okay. So if you had one person who's you combine the two incomes, is it?
Exactly.
Good to know. How are dividends taxed?
So again, it depends on whether or not you have NHR, and it's a common
Okay.
theme. So I'll speak
Yes.
NHR, with and without. But essentially, if you have NHR, then the dividends are not taxed in Portugal. If you do have NHR, sorry, if you have NHR, it's not taxed. If you don't have NHR, then there's a flat rate of 28% that you get taxed on, but it's offset again, given that the federal tax is already paid in the US. So in other words, those are deducted first, and then you pay whatever's on top of that, up to 28%.
Will I be taxed if I move my savings to Portugal?
Yeah, no, the taxes that you pay are for income generated only, not for
Okay.
moving money across.
Okay. Now the US Roth IRA, how is this taxed?
So this is done in two different ways. So essentially, you know what part is capital and what part is growth, and you're only taxed on the amount that's growth.
Okay.
And then you can't distinguish if you can't distinguish between the capital and the growth, then the taxes are 50% of the received value.
Okay. And these are all quite complex questions by the sound of it. I would sort of recommend people take the information from here and use it as a starting point, but I really do think it's one of those things that you should actually speak to someone about, because even with these answers, I'm sure there could be some variation depending on the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tax advisors themselves, you can book a consultation from the site, and then an hour's worth of conversation with a tax advisor will be able to clarify a lot of these things and how they relate to you personally. Whereas I'm really talking more generally. So it's very much advised.
So the 401k, how is this taxed?
It's as a pension from previous jobs. If you have NHR, then again, it's 0% or 10%, depending on when you actually get in the NHR status, because it's changed a few years ago. And no, NHR it's regular rates on the progressive brackets, so regularly taxed.
Okay. If I sell if I've moved to Portugal, I'm now resident and tax resident here, and I sell a home that I still own in the US, how would that be taxed? Would I be subject to capital gains tax?
If again, NHR, no.
Okay.
Without NHR, yes.
Okay. So a lot of the questions have been like with or without NHR. There's a new regime that, as I understand it, still actually hasn't really come into place yet. It seems to have multiple different sort of nicknames to it. Some people call it NHR 2.0. Some people call it the Scientific Research and Innovative or Innovation Regime. What is the latest on this, Scott?
Maybe Ines can tell me a little bit about this as well. For what I understand, as you know, there is in the previous government that's really anti-foreigner in a lot of ways. They created a lot of roadblocks for different things. For example, removed the golden visas for residential properties. They removed the NHR. They removed AL licenses for people wanting to rent their properties on Airbnb. But this new government is really proactive again, and they're actually doing things to reverse a lot of the damage the previous government did. And then the NHR is one of those things that they're talking about bringing back. They haven't brought it back yet, but they're talking about it, and we expect it to happen soon. And if that happens, they have all sorts of different options. So, for example, if you had a company here that you were either working for or a director of, so you can create your own company that was a startup of some kind, then you automatically get NHR access. In theory, assuming that this comes back, which it looks like it will. So this, what I'm talking about right now is all the different options that are available to us now. But in the very near future, we expect that to change and be much more lenient. So again, whenever someone's interested in moving here, contact us, and we can see where they fit in to the current laws.
Okay, and I imagine if someone contacts you with regards to any of the visas that we've discussed, you would be able to put them in touch with your tax advisor as well.
Absolutely. There's actually an option on the website where they can just book a consultation with the tax advisor straight off.
Okay, perfect. And actually, that is quite rare to find. Actually, I found that when searching around, that just having a button to book a consultation seems to be rare. They sort of want to sign you up for a lot more, whereas some people, they just want that 1 hour phone call just to get a rough idea of what's it going to look like financially if I move to Portugal.
Yeah, exactly. And what we try to do is keep it cost effective as well. A lot of these individuals are charging a fortune for the first conversation. What we prefer is to give an introductory call for a reasonable rate, answer the questions they need, and then if they need more advice after that, we can continue on or otherwise.
Okay. You mentioned Madeira, you mentioned the Azores with different tax rates. Is it like more tax efficient for me to move there rather than mainland Portugal?
Well, they both have lower tax rates personally, on a personal basis. So they are more efficient that way. But they have so many interesting things there. For example, they have a very low corporate tax rate. So any businesses that incorporate there, I think they pay 5% tax rate as well, tax as well. So it's much lower than on the mainland. So if anybody wants to consider that, I'd recommend looking into it because they are beautiful islands. A little bit small for some people. They move, moving from New York to Azores, it might be a little bit of a culture shock in place for them. But if you can handle that, or if you like that kind of thing, it's definitely recommended.
Okay, so worth considering if you like the idea of living on an island and you're looking for ways to make your money go further.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about people who have a remote job with a US company and they're living in Portugal. How are these going to be taxed? We've got a couple of different examples. I don't know if you want to run through them.
Sure. So there's lots of variables like anything we've been talking about. So again, I'm only going to give you a few of them, but if people want more information, get in touch. So if they're on the NHR or if they can get NHR and they have the W-2, then taxes are paid in the US and they're exempt here. If they have W-2 and no taxes are paid in the US, then it's HVA 20% or 10% if pre-2020 NHR. So in other words, if you have the benefit of being approved for NHR before 2020, you pay 10%, and if after 2020, it's 20%. And then if no taxes are paid on the W-2 in the US, no HVA, then they're in the regular tax brackets. So basically, it's deducting a lot of the amounts from the US, and then you pay the extra on top here if there is any.
A similar question on freelancing and remote work for those who are coming to Portugal to work remotely. Will they need to pay Portuguese Social Security?
So there is a exemption period of 12 months for that, where they don't have to start paying until after that period of time.
Yep.
I was going to say, considering the work is performed in Portugal and not in trips to the US. So making that clear.
Okay. Let's say I have an equivalent of Social Security contributions in my country, where I can build up sort of retirement income or something along those lines. Can I just pay it in the country where I was living before, or do I have to pay it in Portugal?
Now, this is something I find really funny because, again, I'm reading this information from my tax advisor, and this is not my words, but I like it. He says, no, it's butt-based. In other words, where your butt is, where you're sitting to do the work. For more than 90% of the countries, including Portugal, in the world that have Social Security, you have to pay the Social Security on the country where your butt is sitting while doing the work. But you still have to pay US Social Security and Medicare on the 12 months exemption period in Portugal. So it's butt-based.
Butt-based. Okay. Interesting financial term, one I hadn't heard of before. If I don't earn income in Portugal, will I still need to submit a Portuguese tax return?
Yes. When you're a resident in Portugal, you need to submit a Portuguese tax return regardless. If you're a resident here, it's just something you have to do.
Okay. What should US citizens know about filing twice, like once in the US and once in Portugal?
So when filing twice, the second tax return replaces the first one.
Okay.
So,
Is there a technique to file, like, should I file in Portugal or the US first?
Again, this is a much larger question. Okay,
Okay.
it depends on your situation, but typically it depends where your streams of income are coming from. General rule, except for Social Security, is that you file in the Portugal first, and then file in the US using the tax credit for the taxes already paid in Portugal.
Okay. And final tax-related question, how much are annual property taxes in Portugal?
So annual taxes here for property are very, very low in comparison to the US particularly. In Portugal, they have a tendency to undervalue the properties for taxes, which is also rare. Here, they value them at like 30 to 50% of the market value of the property. And then property taxes are between 0.3 and 0.45% of that value. So it's much, much less.
Okay. We have some property questions coming up. Scott, I think this is also your area of expertise.
This is certainly more so, yes.
Can Americans buy property in Portugal?
Oh yeah, it's very easy. In fact, it's just as easy as if you're a resident here. So the only requirements really are that you have a NIF number and ideally have a bank account, and those are both easy to obtain. So
Okay. And you run Buy Property, which I will send a link out to with the email. So you cover the whole of Portugal. You see where people are looking for properties. Is there any areas where you see people looking and you think, you know what, that's a nice area and it's a little bit undervalued?
let's talk about all of Portugal first of all, because there's some really beautiful gems right across the country. What typically happens is in the north of Portugal, it tends to be a lot more inviting price-wise. You can get a lot more bang for your buck, so to speak, than in the south. Of course, the downside of that is in the north, it rains a lot, which of course is great for the vineyards that all come from there, that creates the best wine. But for me, I prefer more sunshine. So down in the south, it gets warmer as you go. And for me, it's better, but also it's more expensive accordingly. So in that kind of idea, the interior is also quite inexpensive. You get a lot more local feel there, I guess. As opposed to, for example, if you want to buy in Lisbon or Cascais, there's a lot of people wanting to move there now, so the prices have risen significantly. And same thing in the Algarve. It's in what's called the Golden Triangle, from like Lulé to Quinta do Lago to Vila Moura. It's really jumped up in price here a lot because it's really the most desirable area. But they have a lot of other areas that are really interesting to me. One of which I've been kind of falling in love with is Silves. It's a really beautiful town. It's not overly expensive. It's not too far from the airport. You get a lot of, a mixture of foreigners and locals, and the whole atmosphere there is really inviting. So for me, I really like it there. Tavira is also nice. Olhão is another one that is really up and coming. It's an old fishing town that has seen a surgence of foreigners moving there, but it still doesn't have quite the prices that are in the Golden Triangle area.
Okay, good to know. And for foreigners buying in Portugal, do they have to buy in cash or can they get a mortgage?
Oh, they can certainly get a mortgage. Now, the only difference, again, between residents here and foreigners is the fact that the foreigners have to pay a little bit higher deposit. It's in between 25 and 30%, whereas the residents here only have to pay 10%. So as long as you can come up with that deposit, you're good to go.
Okay, good to know. And then for those that want to they're looking at properties on the various property sites out there. Sometimes they're a little lacking in information, especially if you're coming from the US where you have something like Zillow. Are there any property portals out there that provide a similar level of information?
Yeah, so I mean, we created Buy Property to facilitate this exact question because I also came from North America and I'm used to having a lot more data to help me make proper or intelligent buying decisions. And there seemed to be nothing here. So what we did was we created a portal that allowed us to be able to not only show which properties are overvalued and undervalued in comparison to everyone else, it allows us also to determine how much that property is worth if you want to rent it out as a long-term investment or a short-term investment. We can see information such as how long it's been on the market for, all the different price drops there have been, and how motivated the sellers are. And we even have an AI tool now that allows people to say, you know, I want to buy a 3 to 4 bedroom property in the Algarve for in between 700 and 900,000 that has a pool and 15 minutes drive from whatever school they want, and it'll bring up all the properties for them as well. So when it comes to the information that they're looking for to make smarter buying decisions, it's really the only tool that does any of these things.
Okay, fantastic. And I will be sharing the link to that soon. So one thing we talked about in our previous webinar on property was some of the challenges of buying in Portugal or buying in another country as a foreigner. What are some things, if you were buying in Portugal now for the first time, given everything that you've learned, that you would be more cautious about?
Well, it's a little bit like the Wild West here in some ways. So, for example, there are some issues with ownership. So, when a couple passes away and they children inherit their property, there's a right of these children to all have a share in that property. And sometimes some of the children are eager to sell that property, and other ones not so much. So they hold out. So, you know, you really have to understand who the ownership is of that property, and you know, if not everyone's signing on the dotted line, then that becomes an issue for you later on. But there's all sorts of other ones that are issues. For example, there's a lot of illegal properties here. So in other words, somebody might have an illegal pool that is not registered with the municipality, which they may at one point in time come and ask you to fill up, or they may have an extra room. So it's really important to have a surveyor involved and a legal team that understands what to look for, because otherwise you can have all these little surprises that pop up later on that end up costing you a lot. I mean, I've seen someone who had to remove a whole wing of their house because it was illegal. And that could have been avoided, or if they had done the research ahead of time and understood that that was illegal and maybe chosen a different property. But again, there's so many of them. There's so many issues that it's not so important if you buy an apartment other than the ownership issue, because obviously you're not going to have any illegal aspects of an apartment that's been added. But when it comes to villas particularly, there's a lot more things that can go wrong. So it's important to get people who are on the ground, understand what the laws are, understand what to look for to help facilitate that transaction on your behalf.
Okay. Now, some people buying a property in Portugal might be thinking, I'm going to buy this property, and when I'm not there, I'm going to rent it out. I understand you need an AL license for this. If I'm buying a property that already has an AL license, can that be transferred to me?
Yeah, it certainly can. And that's really a new law. I mentioned before about how the previous government was really trying to get rid of the AL licenses and the Airbnb properties in general. But that's now changed in the fact that the AL licenses are transferable, and they're actually allowed to apply for new AL licenses for new builds as well, which is a very great thing. There's certain exceptions in what's called contention areas. For example, the center of Lisbon that doesn't allow it and will never allow it. But in other areas, it seems to be possible again, which is great news for everybody.
Okay, fantastic. And then in terms of just, I guess, a more personal advice, Scott, some people will be thinking about moving to Portugal. Should I rent first? Should I buy? When should I consider buying? Do you have any thoughts on that, or does it vary depending on the person?
I mean, it depends on their situation, of course. You know, some people have already been to Portugal and they know the areas very well, in which case it might be advantageous for them to purchase a property already. If they haven't already come to Portugal and they're thinking about moving here, then it might be advantageous to rent a property so they can do some exploring before they decide to buy. You know, it's the only requirement is that if you do come over here and rent a property, you need to have a rental agreement registered with finances for at least a year. And some people don't necessarily need that long before they decide where to live, but then they're stuck to that period of time and that lease. They oftentimes, because you're foreigners and because you're not resident here, the landlords will charge you 2 months or more deposit and you know, first month and last month's rent. So the amount you get into getting that property could be high. And if you were to buy a property, you know, you put all that money into the deposit initially.
Yeah, it's always a tricky one, isn't it? Do I rent or do I buy, and when is the right time to do it?
Exactly.
But I'm sure that you and Inej can provide more sort of rounded advice on the whole thing for anyone that comes through. Is there anything else that you would sort of advise for, let's say, people from the US who have just decided, hey, I'm thinking about moving to Portugal. Where should they sort of start looking and thinking about moving?
Where would I recommend them moving? Is that what you're saying?
What would you recommend that people think about? I know before you've talked about sort of choosing a place that matches with your lifestyle, for example. Is that sort of where
Exactly.
you would begin?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I sent them an article I wrote about, for example, how to find a place that matches your lifestyle. Because of course, the lifestyle you're going to get in places like Porto is going to be completely different than the ones you get down in the Algarve. You know, Algarve is much sunnier. You tend to do more outdoor things. Porto's great, has a great cultural community, but it's mostly indoor theaters and such. And of course, you want the bigger city life. You can go to Cascais and Lisbon, a lot more exciting, a lot more things to do, but a lot busier and a lot more cars. And of course, you want to do the other direction and go very slow and local. You can go into Évora and Alentejo area, and it's just a much slower lifestyle and calmer and peaceful and no ocean around. But so it really depends on what you're looking for and what kind of lifestyle you want. And once you figure that out, then you can start looking around at which areas match that lifestyle, because there's all sorts of different options right across the country, and there's something for everybody.
Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to ask Inej a similar question about if someone was thinking about moving to Portugal now, there's a lot of legal things that we've considered. What would you say would be their starting point from now on?
Their starting points should be a consultation with an immigration lawyer. I'm
Okay.
not telling you it's mandatory for you to have a lawyer assist you through the process, but it's easier. And if you feel like you don't need the assistance throughout the process, you should at least have an initial consultation to speak with a lawyer to see if you are qualifying exactly as you feel you're qualifying. Because sometimes when I read information on the internet or when you hear us speaking, because when we hear you, we're just giving general advice.
Mhm.
All cases need to be looked through. So you might feel like you qualify. Oh, I check all the boxes, but it's good that you check if you really check all the boxes, because there's some criteria that's not really broadcast online. So I would start by having a consultation with an immigration lawyer. And then after that consultation, I would evaluate, okay, am I ready to apply? Can I do it by myself? Or maybe I need some assistance, I feel insecure, I'm going to hire someone. And then after that, I would start just checking boxes, because it feels like you have a lot to do before you apply. So I would
Yeah.
just start checking the boxes I need. But first step, I would say, is to find an immigration lawyer. There's a ton of them, but you can hire us, of course. But there you can find a lot of immigration lawyers. I would contact one, I would get a consultation, and then I would just start preparing, because you can't apply immediately. You need to prepare your folder. So that's what I would do.
Okay. That is, I think that's great advice. And between both you and Scott gives a very good place for people to start, between speaking to someone like yourself who's going to give you the practical side of what you would need to move to Portugal, and then from Scott sort of more thinking about where might be the right place to move to Portugal, to a country that you might not have visited before. So I want to thank you both for everything that you've provided today. We've covered a lot of information, a lot of different topics: taxes, property, visas, you name it. So I'm sure that people's minds are probably struggling a little bit. I will send out the replay. You will be able to listen to it. I'll also be sending out the information for Scott and Inej. I know there's a lot more sort of specific questions people are asking. Consider getting in touch with them. Consider booking a consultation. They are, it's best to get that personal advice once you've had the general advice, and then to figure out next steps. So thank you, Inej and Scott. It's been great having you both.
Thank you for
Thanks.
inviting me.
Yeah, thanks again, James. It's been great. And I have seen a lot of questions go by, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to get to them all. So again, James will be sending out our contact information. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and we're happy to help you out.
Okay, well, thank you again, and until next time.
Thanks, James. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.